So my name is David Cobb. I am a proud, I am a patriotic, and these days I am a pissed off American citizen. All right, good. I'm so good to get that response. Because the anger that I'm talking about and that clearly you share with me is a righteous anger. And I use that word very carefully, but also very confidently. It is a righteous anger. Because I'll tell you something, folks, righteous anger is unique. See, if you just get angry about something and you just stew in it and wallow in it, that's not righteous. In fact, that's dangerous. It's dangerous physically, it's dangerous emotionally, it's dangerous psychologically, it's dangerous spiritually. Righteous anger is unique because it requires action. In fact, part of the amazing mystery is that whenever you allow righteous anger to well up within you and that it propels you into action, it actually helps to transform that anger into joy because you realize that you're actually part of creating something. You're not just complaining about it. It is actually the motivation for making change. Because I can remember a time when I was a proud and patriotic American with no other qualifier. And for me personally, that's when I was a little boy. When I was taught that I was from the United States of America and that it was the land of the free and the home of the brave. And not only that, but America stood for liberty and justice and equality. And not only that, but my country was like some great shining light on the hill. And it was going to guarantee liberty and justice and equality for the entire world. I was so proud to be from that country, and when I grew up I became angry because I realized I had been lied to. What cognitive scientists are learning and teaching us is that we as human beings understand the world through the stories we tell each other. Stories are critically important, and so therefore I'm going to tell a story. I'm going to tell a story of how it came to be that large transnational corporations are not just exercising power, but they are ruling us. As surely as masters once ruled slaves, as surely as kings once ruled subjects, unelected and unaccountable corporate CEOs are ruling us because they're making the decisions. They're making the decision about energy policy. Corporate CEOs are making decisions about whether this country goes to war. We are left to choose between paper or plastic at the grocery store. Consumer choices, as wonderful as they may be, are not really the same thing as having power to rule about how society should be operating. Quick pop quiz. How many folks believe we the people are ruling in the United States? Don't be shy. Look around. Not a single hand went up. It is rare when I ask the question, do you believe the people rule, that anybody even tentatively kind of raises it, like maybe sort of, nah. People don't even raise their hand. And let me tell you something, folks, that is a problem. The word sovereignty means the authority to rule. And for many of us, when we think of the sovereign, we think of the king, right? That's because 500 years ago, the king was the sovereign. The sovereign was the king. The words were literally synonymous. And where, by the way, did the king get his authority to rule? God. And listen, folks, I am personally a Green Party member, and I'm proud of that. I'm equally proud to say that I work very closely with progressive Democrats across the country. In fact, I helped to bring the Progressive Democrats of America into the Move to Amend coalition. And I'm proud to tell you that on issues where I can find common ground, I work very closely with principled conservatives, libertarians, Republicans, and in fact, I've worked with socialists, I've worked with anarchists. I say all that to share with you that I have a long history of working in respectful coalition with groups and individuals with whom I have common ground. And I say that not so you'll pat me on the head, but so that you'll understand this. When I say, in my long history of social change work, I have never had the privilege, the opportunity to work in respectful collaboration and coalition with a monarchist. Right? And 500 years ago, that's all there was. And 500 years is the blink of an eye in human history. And I say that because I want us to challenge ourselves for just a moment. How many times have you heard, or maybe even you yourself have thought, we can't amend the Constitution, it's too hard. Like, that's too big a lift. That's so far outside of what is possible. And I think I want to challenge myself and you as well to recognize these kind of changes that we're talking about have happened before. All it takes is for enough of us to begin to think differently and act differently, and we will change the reality that we are all participating in. It's bring me to the third concept, which is legal personhood. Please note that I did not write corporate personhood on the board. That's because I want us to understand that legal personhood literally means the ability to assert rights. This is a very important concept, and the idea that a corporation is a person with the ability to assert rights should make us pause. And the last concept that we're going to cover is the corporation. In law school, we are taught that a corporation is a legal fiction. A corporation is a construct. It is created as a fiction by us pretending like it actually exists, and that is done for a reason. For example, how many people here have heard the phrase, all roads lead to Rome? Where'd all those hands go, right? 2,000 years later, and we still say that phrase, right? Check it out. That entire road system was designed by, built, and maintained as a Roman corporation. Likewise, the aqueduct system, that amazing bit of engineering that moved water all across the Italian peninsula without electricity. Humans are clever, right? In fact, the first universities and the first hospitals were actually operated as, you know, a Roman corporation. Quick question. What does a road system, a water system, a hospital, a university, what do they all have in common? They're all public goods. They're public infrastructure. And the genius of the corporation is to take private money and to put it to public use. Now, I've said this a couple of times, so I'll point out the genius of the idea of a corporation. David Cobb is not anti-corporation. The move to amend coalition is not anti-corporation. Corporations can be put to good ideas. So don't let it be said that we're anti-corporation in this movement. Right? There's a difference here. That taking private money and putting it to public use, there's another way that we normally think of when government takes private money. What's that called?
Taxes.
Taxes. Taxes are mandatory, right? I mean, when the tax person shows up, the tax person can say, time for taxes, would you please be willing to pay? And the genius of the corporation is to take private money, material resources, in a voluntary manner and to put it to public use. That is a genius idea, and we should never lose sight of the fact that the concept of the corporation is a good idea. The problem, of course, is the modern transnational corporation doesn't exactly operate that way, does it?
No.
That's because the modern transnational corporation actually comes out of the 14th, 15th, 16th century of Europe. You know, the age of discovery. I have to put discovery in quotation marks, right? Because what was discovered? Africa, Asia, later North and South America. Newsflash. There were people living there. They weren't lost. They didn't need to be discovered. And so, in the interest of truth-telling, let's just acknowledge this is not the age of discovery, the 14th, 15th, and 16th century. In fact, it's the age of rape and pillage and plunder and murder. There's one word for me that sums it up. It's the age of empire. And imperialism is just exactly that. It's rape, pillage, plunder, murder, theft. It's beating people down. It's killing them. It's stealing their resources away from them. There's nothing pretty about it. It's brutal. And the modern transnational corporation was not just created during that time period. The modern transnational corporation was created as an instrument of empire. In fact, one of the most famous of the modern transnational corporations was the East India Company, literally designed to subjugate the entire people of the subcontinent of India, to destroy their existing institutions, to destroy everything about their culture, to replace their institutions with proper British institutions, and to make them dependent upon those new institutions that had been thrust upon them. And in fact, another of the early corporations was an outfit known as the Africa Trading Company. Would anybody like to guess what the Africa Trading Company traded? The word that pops into my head to answer that question, the Africa Trading Company traded slaves. And may I say that when that word pops into my head, that's an example of the fact that I'm colonized. That I have heard a story over and over again about the narrative art. Look, I'm not proud of it, but I'm also not saying it because I'm a bad person. I'm not a bad person. I'm a good person. But I am subject to, I am a participant in the culture in which I operate. Because after all, was Africa populated by slaves? Right? Africa was populated by people. But I say the Africa Trading Company traded people basically just like me with certainty, with conviction. Because if you ask any scientist, if you ask any biologist, she or he will tell you race does not exist. I mean, sure, skin pigment exists, obviously. Ethnicity even exists. There are plenty of ways to distinguish different groups of human beings, but no biologist would elevate those kinds of distinctions to a classification or a taxonomy. Point I'm making is that race is a construct just as surely as the corporation is a construct. It gets created for a reason. In other words, folks, I'm suggesting that corporatism, militarism, and racism are inextricably linked concepts, and what links them all is oppression. And I'm not the first American to say that. In fact, one of the greatest American political philosophers and orators of all time said basically the same thing in what I believe is his best political speech. It's not this man's most famous speech, because his most famous speech is known as I Have a Dream. Who am I talking about?
Martin Luther King.
Martin Luther King. And I hope you've heard that speech, because it's a speech worthy of listening to. It's inspirational, it's uplifting, but honestly, for my money, it's not his best political speech. Because his best political speech was not delivered in Washington, D.C., but was delivered in New York City. Specifically, it was delivered at Riverside Church. Several of you know this speech because I can tell by how you're reacting to me right now. That speech is known as Beyond War, or Beyond Vietnam. And in that speech, King, Reverend King, a minister, said, the United States of America is suffering from a spiritual and moral decay. I mean, this is a reverend. These are strong words. And this decay is based upon the triple evils of racism, militarism, and extreme materialism, or greed. And he said, unless and until this country is willing to come to terms with those evils, we can never become the country that we deserve to be, that we want it to be, or, in his language, that God wants for us. And may I suggest to you folks that King was right then, and he's right now. Unless and until we actually deal with oppressions writ large, that are whether they're based on gender, whether they're based on race, whether they're based on class exploitation, we can never usher in the new world that is just waiting for us if enough of us begin to think and act differently.